Welcome back, everybody. For our final section here, for the entire class, very last part of it, we cover desert depositional landforms. Okay, so we'll look at our diagram again. This time we're focused on things like the alluvial fans, the talus deposits, things that are a result of deposition. So we have these erosional processes taking sediment away. Where does that sediment go? Where does the dirt pile wind up? Well, it might wind up as an alluvial fan or something else. We'll see. So what are our depositional features we're going to talk about? Well, we've got things formed by deposition of sediment like alluvial fans, bajadas, playas, sand dunes, and our Talus Slope deposits. Okay, so what is going on in this first picture? Well, what's happening here is we have some sort of body of water coming through this channel, and as it exits the relatively steep, narrow channel out here into the relatively flat portion, it spreads out. The coarser stuff gets deposited closer. The finer materials, smaller materials, get deposited further out, and the result is that we have something that is sort of a fan shape, right? An alluvial fan. Now, it's important to note here, right, the actual material it is built out of is called alluvium to make the alluvial fan. It's also important to note here that the whole thing is not being built at once. So the channel, at some point it's coming this way, at some point it's coming this way, it sort of meanders around, and so you have the entire lobe. Most of it is inactive, right, with these little dots, and only a part of it is active and undergoing deposition at once. So then it sort of builds outward in the fan like this, as opposed to covering this entire area at once. Well, what are alluvial fans, right? Going to be this in our photo there. These are going to be our fan-shaped piles of sediment called alluvium. They form wherever we have a rapidly flowing stream that empties out into a relatively flat valley. And as the water slows down, it drops all of its carried sediment. And the stream typically, at some point it's over here, and then it migrates over here for a while, and then it migrates over here, and builds in all of these sorts of different directions at once, gradually building up the fan shape. Now, sometimes we'll have all of these mountain streams that are sort of going in parallel here, and each one is building its own fan, and those fans start to sort of overlap, right? You can see there's a fan here, 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 right? A lot of fans here, they tend to overlap and form what is called a bajada. So these are going to be our overlapping alluvial fans, right? We can see them at the base of the mountains here. It's actually going to bury the front part of the mountain range in sediment that's coming off of the mountain range itself. And like with our alluvial fans, this is going to be sediment deposition due to water. Okay, so let's jump a little bit. Now, we have our mountain in the background, but we're not really looking at that. We're looking at this thing here, right? Something that looks like a lake that has dried up. And that's exactly what we have, something called a playa. Here's another example. You can actually see the mud cracks in this one. So this is going to be a desert landform, which is a shallow, seasonal, or short-lived lake. So sometimes it's a lake, it quickly dries up and looks like this for most of the year. There's no outlet to the sea here. It's not going to drain into the ocean in any way like we see sometimes with the basins, the watersheds, all of that. Instead, it's just going to evaporate, right? We have internal drainage. These are going to be very common in desert regions throughout the world and tend to be extremely flat. Sediment deposition here is due to water. All right, so next we're going to look at these things, right? These sort of sand piles or sediment piles, right? And we have one type here of sand dune, we'll call it, and we have our other type of dunes over here. So these are going to fall into a couple different categories, or different types of sand dunes. This is not information that you'll need to know in too much detail, but it's good to know, right? So we have our Barcan dunes. You notice that with these, right, it curves into the wind, in a sense. So we have our long side here, short side here, curves into the wind. Have something that is sort of the opposite of this over here, are parabolic dunes, right? So we have curves that sort of resist the wind. We have linear dunes, tend to form in lines. Transverse dunes, transverse means like perpendicular, going to be perpendicular to the direction of the wind. And finally, in areas where you have wind blowing all over the place in no sort of consistent direction, you'll get something called a star dune, which has a very irregular pattern like this. So these are our most classic desert landform. Tend to be hills of loose sand built by wind processes, not water, aeolian built. They're going to occur in some deserts as well as a couple areas like, the Great Sand Dunes National Park in the US, in Colorado. That's not necessarily a desert area, something that results from a very, very particular sort of wind pattern in that area. we have 5 main types that we looked at on the last page. Our final depositional landform is something called a talus slope. So we have our big body of rock, it's exposed to all the elements, it tends to weather very quickly compared to the flatter stuff around it, right? Tallest blade of grass here is going to be the first one to get cut down. It releases all of this loose rubble onto its own slopes, and this is going to be called our talus slope. And this is a non-desert example here, but it is the same process. So we have our pile of rocks, sediment, it's going to accumulate at the base of a cliff or some kind of a pronounced slope. These accumulate largely due to gravity. So we have periodic rockfall, which slowly builds these up over time. They do tend to form this sort of fan shape outward. Usually there's a pretty steep angle here. This would be hard to climb up. Sediment deposition here is more due to gravity, process called mass wasting, than it is due to wind or water. All right, let's do this one last time. We have our big ideas as it relates to deserts. We have our North American monsoon, the patterns there, and the overall ideas. Keep in mind that topic is very complicated, so knowing and understanding every single part of it could be very difficult, but the big picture I want you to understand. We have those 5 types of deserts and how they form. We have our erosional landforms and we have our depositional landforms. And for those of you who have made it all the way to the end of the course here, thank you.